Okay, team, I think we're gonna get started. So thank you all for joining us for our fourth and final land use code learning session. This session is going to be on housing choice, affordability, and density. And our agenda for the evening is we'll start with an update on housing projects from the Silverton Housing Authority. And then we'll move into best practices within a land use code to promote housing, choice, affordability, and density with Clark Anderson from Community Builders. And then we'll end with how the land use code will address housing with Gabby Hart from the Clarion team. So I will send it over to Anne.
I need to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Chase. I am the director of the Silverton Housing Authority, and I wanted to take this opportunity to educate the community on the current development projects of the Silverton Housing Authority, and give an overview of those projects and where they will be. You can go to the next slide, Lucy. So we currently have 4 major development projects. The first is the Anvil multifamily development. So we're going to put some townhomes within Anvil, and I'll point those out in a minute. And those are dedicated to residents who have an income level that is 125% of the area median income or below. Boxcar apartments will be located just above the pre-existing apartments in Anvil, and similar AMI area median income restrictions of 125% and below. I think those will actually be more like 80% and below, but that is still to be determined. And then San Juan Development Association has just completed their lottery for 3 single-family homes. 1 has been built, 1 is soon to be under contract, and 2 groundbreaking is happening this summer. And those are for sale units at 100% of the area median income and below. Then the Zanoni property is located east, but adjacent to the Anvil Mountain subdivision. And those will be a combination of for sale and rental, available to residents that are at the 140% area median income level or below. Next slide, Lucy. And real quickly, I just wanted to go over where these restrictions come from as far as income level. So in order to make these projects feasible and affordable, we have to source funding to cover the difference between the construction cost and what is considered affordable. And so these usually come in the form of grants or loans. And with these investments from these other entities, they often require that this money is subsidizing a home that will serve a specific income level. And usually that varies. Usually it's like 140% of the income level and below. And this is just to guarantee that these subsidies are helping lower income residents access housing opportunities. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of background on where these restrictions come from. Next slide, Lucy. So here's a visual aid of our different projects. This is from the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority small scale housing technical assistance project that we completed in 2022 to create a conceptual plan of the build out of Anvil. And so the multifamily units are located on the end caps of what is typically referred to as the donut. And across the street, we are currently reviewing proposals from developers on what exactly the layout and quantity of units that will go into this project, with an expected contract, I'd say in end of May, hopefully. So more to come on what exactly these will look like, but these will be a combination of for sale and rental units. And we are leaning into some building styles that are higher density. So we're looking at duplexes, quadplexes, to maximize the buildable land that we have while not sacrificing isn't the right word. Maybe it is, for the livability of these units. And then the inner donut single family, these are what San Juan Development Association is working on. There will be a future, there's still undeveloped lots in here, which will be another lottery system to be determined. And then the boxcar apartments are located above the pre-existing Anvil apartments. The number of units and the look of these is to be determined, but probably pretty similar to the pre-existing apartment complex. And then next slide, we see. This is just a little bit more about what income levels these will serve. So 120% area median income and below. Combination of for sale and for rent. The allocation of how many for sale and for rent is also to be determined. We are ambitiously planning to break ground on this project this summer. Everything is, we'll see what happens this summer, but that is the goal. We have a lot of momentum on this project. And this slideshow is just, I recycled this from our Silverton Housing Authority meeting on Monday. So not all of it is completely relevant to this presentation, but this is the nitty gritty of the project. Next slide, Lucy. Boxcar apartments, 100% AMI and below. These are all going to be affordable, a combination of 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom units. We got a grant this winter from the state to help fund pre-development engineering plans for grading and stormwater, and all of the pre-development plans are happening this summer. Next slide. 4 single family homes, all have been spoken for through the San Juan Development affordable lottery, and completion is expected anywhere between fall 2024 and fall 2025. So a bit of a typo there. And this is through a grant through the state. But these are, again, our single family homes. Next slide, Lucy. The Zanoni property is located east of Anvil, but connected to it. The grant that we used to purchase this land requires that residents are within the 140 area median income level and below. And we just had our kickoff meeting with CHAFA to create a conceptual plan for this site. More information will be coming out soon about when the public can engage on what the conceptual plans are going to be. So very similar to what Chaffa did for Anvil, but this time for the Zanoni property. And here we're trying to fit as many units as possible and livable and beneficial to the community. And yeah, very much in the planning phase for this project. And that is all I have from the Silverton Housing Authority.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. That was a super awesome update. And now I'll hand it over to Clark. If you want to share your screen and we can start talking about some of our best practices in the land use code.
Good stuff. Thank you. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm gonna get these rolling. Well, thanks for doing this, and thanks for having me along. It's really cool to be a part of the ongoing journey and progress that's happening in Silverton. What you guys are looking at is really some important questions around how do we, as a community, continue to evolve and create affordability, ensure this is a place where people have opportunity, where we're not losing the locals who make the community what it is, and that, you know, over the long term, it's a real livable place, not just another mountain town that prices people out. And how do we do that in a way that, you know, is actually practical, and how do we avoid some of the mistakes of other places? And, you know, looking at the policy tools that are available to do that is really important. It does come with some recognition of some basic realities of communities, which is that communities do grow and change. And to create affordability in our communities does require that we continue to meet the needs of the changing makeup of our community, and that also comes with change. So I think that's an embedded idea within the work that you guys are doing here, but I think it's worth looking at. So a couple things I'm going to try to cover is, one, just understanding, you know, setting almost policy aside for a minute, understanding why it's so important that we have planning and policy frameworks that make it possible to build the different housing types we might want in our community. And then thinking about what are those types that actually fit in a place like Silverton, which is a pretty unique environment. And then thinking about, just at a high level, a couple places we can start in terms of, you know, that policy direction we're going in. And really, for today, it'll be pretty light on that part, but I know you guys will be digging deeper into that as we move forward. So when we think about the choices and the housing types we have in our community, it can sometimes feel like a really aesthetic thing, and that, you know, there's just, you know, there's different types of housing, and so that impacts the way our community looks and feels, and, you know, kind of end of story. Or we might think of it more from the lens of a developer or somebody in the private sector, which is, you know, how does this fit into my business model and what we're trying to create? But it turns out that housing choices and diversity play a hugely important role in affordability. One of the things that impacts affordability so much is both the types of housing we have and the amount of housing we have, and they actually turn out to be interrelated. So in this sort of increasingly idealized and somewhat fictional idea of a balanced housing market, we have this churn of different housing types, and the different housing types aren't just different in terms of their size or whatnot, but actually how old they are and the number of units they provide and their tenure. So they're either rental or ownership. And that diversity, the age of homes, the size of homes, it meets different needs for different people in our community. And when we're keeping up with it, the churn and the turnover actually opens up opportunities for different people at different stages of their life. So younger families, older, maybe retired people, people in mid-career, single folks coming in to live in our communities. It creates the different types of options that are needed for different types of people. So this sort of like from when you're on your sleeping on the couch days to where you need a 3-bedroom home for your family, or to where you want to downsize and retire, there are options for you. The problem, of course, is that increasingly in many communities, we're making it harder and harder to create diverse housing types in our communities. And a lot of that actually does come down to local zoning. And so we'll come back to that. But this idea of, how do we create housing types and diversity is really important. And it also comes with the question of housing supply. So I mentioned the importance of housing diversity. Housing supply does matter too when it comes to affordability. And I know in a lot of mountain communities like Silverton, like Glenwood, there's a degree to which the high end part of our housing market is so strong that we might feel that any new supply is just going to be sopped up in that, and it's not actually going to be affordable. So we should toss out that idea, and it doesn't really work. But there is solid research to show that actually we do also need to keep up with housing supply. And so when you think about a small town like Silverton, how do we add supply in a relatively constrained area that fits the scale and feel of our community? And some of that does come down to a type of density and housing design and neighborhood design that really fits the feel of the community. So I want to sort of think through some of what that can look like in a place like Silverton. And the cool thing is there are really so many different housing types and typologies that we can make work in our community, from smaller, mid-sized single-family homes, which are quite common, but actually in the States, increasingly uncommon, but you guys have got them right here in Silverton, as you can see. And they play an important role. Accessory dwelling units that are increasingly important around Colorado, and definitely in places like Silverton. And again, you have some ADUs, although you have some restrictions on them that would be worth looking at in this process. But accessory dwelling units provide this really great affordability opportunity, both in the sense that they do provide smaller scale housing type that is, by virtue of its small size, tends to remain more affordable, but it also can provide this really great sort of mortgage, built into the house mortgage assistance program for somebody who owns the home, because you actually can rent to somebody while you're living in the main house, or you can live in the ADU and rent out your main house. And honestly, that's the first way I ever got into a home here in Glenwood Springs. Continue to sort of move along the spectrum. There's a lot of different small lot and cottage court concepts. I'll explain the difference between those. Small lot are things like what you see here on the left, which is where we make sure that we're actually allowing really small housing types to fit onto the lots in our community, or we're allowing small lot sizes when we're platting new areas for development. And then the idea of a cottage court is where we sort of start to look at how we can do those in a layout where they actually sort of link together into a feel for a sort of small enclosed neighborhood. And we'll look at some more of those. Now, the just basic small lot concept is really important for you guys to think about. And this came up a lot in the Compass project, because you have these great historic sort of shotgun lots, and the opportunity to think about how can we use a single lot to build, a very historic housing type that fits in great in Silverton and already exists, but currently is harder to do because of the code restrictions you have requiring 2 lots. And so then we can look at how these same concepts sort of fit into a tiny home neighborhood, or again, the sort of smaller lot, single family. Coming again, this is that cottage court concept where you often have sort of an internal community or public space. There's a lot of different ways to design these. Sometimes they're called pocket neighborhoods. And they become very popular in certain areas that are sort of trying to maintain a smaller scale feel in terms of scale of development, but also want to enable density. And so it's a really nice tool for that. It's not a lot of density, but you can create neighborhoods that accomplish a level of density that you're getting both diversity and supply. Here's just some more examples of that. Sorry, that one sort of took over part of the picture. Then we just move into sort of, again, really basic typologies of a duplex and a triplex, and making sure that these are allowed. These can be, and these are examples that are pulled here that have the look and feel, not the perfect look and feel for Silverton, but they're not the kind of things you're going to see in suburban Dallas when we talk about a duplex, right? It's pretty small scale, could be a single family home if you didn't give it a close look. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wow, there's 2 meters on the side of that thing. That thing's actually a duplex. Same thing with sixplexes. This is a spot that's actually just down the road from me. Most people that walk by it think it's a duplex. It's actually a sixplex. It's really well designed to sort of hide the density that's there and make it very livable. And it fits right into a single family neighborhood context. But then provides 6 units for folks in our community. More of that same type of thing. Again, often this is called missing middle housing. And again, these are examples that are, these fit right into a classic single family feel, but they provide this real gentle density that can work really well in small towns and accomplish a number of different goals. Smaller scale row homes and townhomes. Again, here you're getting attached housing type, but also fits almost sort of a single family model very well as well. And then we start to get into more of what we think of when we think about multifamily. So apartment units and 10 to 18 unit scale. Again, these are both scaled to community. Well, obviously, the one on the left is in Silverton, and the other one over here is just down the road from me in Glenwood Springs. It's a great fit and totally the type of thing that, again, would also fit in a place like Silverton. This is larger scale, and I wanted to include it just because it's in another mountain town, Crested Butte, and they worked really hard to try to scale it to the community, and it's in their downtown. This is a LIHTC project, so low income housing tax credit project. So it needed to reach a certain scale of units. I actually think this is a little bit more than 40 units. It's a really cool project though, and creates affordability. It's dense, but it really fits well within the neighborhood there. And I don't think it's sort of fit, too big at all for what they were trying to do. And then we can also, look at the housing stock we have. This is an example of, rehabbing a single family home into neighborhood mixed use. This is actually a project that I did kind of on the side when not trying to run community builders. My wife and I did this. It was an old single family home and had a garage that we turned into a co-working space. So it's now 8 below market units and co-working space. It's a pretty cool spot. But this is a nice transition spot to sort of think about how we actually make these things happen and the role of planning and policy. So this thing was actually, not easy to get done. And I'll talk about some of the things that worked well and some of the things that didn't. So on the good side, there was really clear direction in our comprehensive plan, which is this, overarching document, just like the master plan we have through the Compass project, that said, this is where we want housing, and this is where we're going to do this, and this is where we're going to do that. So in that plan, it said we want more housing types in the downtown, and so this accomplishes that. Also, there'd been some recent capital improvement plan investments in and around this area. So parking, some streets, improved pedestrian environment that really was supportive of making something like this work, and gave us some excitement when we built it, quite some time ago now, that, downtown's ready for this in Glenwood now. This was a little bit before Glenwood's downtown had really sort of started to take off. Zoning was good too, in the sense that this was a use by right. So we didn't have to try to get any variances, and that was really helpful. And also importantly, it just came under the threshold initially, and we'll come into the story here, of not being a major project because it was 8 units. And so that was really helpful because it meant that we didn't have to go through a lot of different extraneous public processes where, it's like, hey, as long as you're meeting all the rules, you can do it. And in this case, we weren't even actually adding anything. We just, everything, all the changes were inside the house. We didn't add anything to the outside. So our dimensional standards and everything like that were okay. We have no off-street parking requirement in our downtown, which also made this feasible. Without that policy, there's no way it would have been possible. We wouldn't have been able to bring those 8 affordable units into the downtown. And we collaborated with the city in their first ever sort of set of fee incentives to encourage affordability. The bad part was that there was some process ambiguity and hurdles that we didn't expect. And one of those was that there were these, subtle language problems in the code that made it unclear whether this was actually a major development or a minor development. It was a big difference, because if it was a major development, it meant we actually had to go through a full process in front of city council, a lot more kind of meetings. And the problem was we had already gotten preliminary approval enough to move forward, and we had started doing this thing by the time they came back and told us, hey, by the way, we actually think this is a major development and you need to now go get it approved. Well, we had already spent a lot of time and money. It was incredibly nerve-wracking for us. It passed, everything worked out. But that also opened up the door for a lot of NIMBYism, not a lot, but people in the neighborhood came out, and that's a challenging thing. It was costly, and so that was problematic. So that lack of clarity in the code caused some problems. And so this issue of policy alignment is something we see all the time. I'll try to keep moving fast here because I know we got to get to everybody else. And I would say, actually, Lucy, just, hit me with the whip when you need to. But I'm pretty close to done here. So this is actually from some work we did in Gunnison with them. It was a downtown strategy for the city of Gunnison. And one of the things they were, we talked about is like, well, what do you guys really love in downtown? What would you like to see more of? And they talked about this building right here, the taller historic building. And, they were like, it'd be cool to see more of that. And the problem was, in their code, they would not be allowed to do this and basically replicate that same building type and do it, because the standards of today would not have allowed that building to be built. So put another way, if that building had burnt down, they couldn't have rebuilt it. So we see this all the time, where there's a disconnect between the sort of idea and the vision and the planning at a community level and what our codes require. And we won't go into the long history of that, but we'll just say that that's a big problem. Stepping back also to sort of weave in the idea of affordability, it's important to note that when it comes to housing policy and specifically the ways we can create affordability, there's a couple different things we can do, and it's useful to think about them on a spectrum. We can begin by what I call enabling. So these are the things we can do to make sure our plans are clear in terms of where housing should and shouldn't go, and the type of housing that we want in different places, and the investments that we want to see happen, and all of that, so that we're basically sort of making it possible for people in the private sector, people that build housing, to give us the type of housing we want in the places we want it. When we do that well, it helps us get housing choices and affordability. And so that's sort of the basic thing everybody ought to do. The next step across is to say, all right, that's good. We did all of that. We also want to think about ways that we can actually incentivize affordability by using policies or investments that stimulate the market to do something. So we were saying, we want to get, Jimbo, the guy who, builds a lot of these housing units for us, to actually keep some of them affordable. And we're going to do fee waivers or some other type of incentive to make it so that in exchange for that incentive, he or she will keep the some number of units affordable, or for resident occupancy only, or what have you. There's a next step, which is sort of how investing in affordability. And this addresses the fact that, and we're not really getting into this today, but it's a really important thing to look at. This addresses the fact that, by and large, when we're talking about creating housing that is below market, which is to say it's not going to cost somebody who's trying to live in it as much as it would cost if it was out on the free market. This is another, below market is sort of another way of saying affordable. That there's going to be a gap between what it costs to build that housing unit and what it and what it would actually fetch if you're keeping it below market. So you are going to then have to find some way to subsidize that gap, fill that gap with local investment. And so this is where creation of local funding or other types of investment are used to buy down the cost of housing. And that's a whole presentation. If you guys want to dig into that at any point, let's do it. We work on that stuff a lot and have a lot of cool stories. And finally, there's tools you can use to require affordability. And this is where you have regulations that say if you're going to develop X number of units, this percentage of them need to be affordable or need to be resident occupancy only, or what have you. These are often, one of the main tools here is inclusionary housing policies, but there are other types of requirements that you can do that get you to the same place. So that's sort of the broad policy spectrum. And then I want to mention, just because a lot of what you guys are looking at right now is in the code, that one of the big places where things do break down is in how outdated our zoning codes are. And so it's, it is very healthy and common for communities that are in the position Silverton is to step back and say, God, it's not like this code came from, history. We can change it. We can fix it. We can make it better. And so pulling out the code and seeing how we can make it work better is very common. Some key things that are often important to that is, how do we make sure the approval process is clear, is fair, an actual human can read your, code and make sense of what they're supposed to do. There's a lot packed into that, but, for time, I'll leave it at that. How do we think about, if we're clear as a community on what type of housing we want, in different areas, like let's make it an allowed use by right. Let's not make it so that somebody has to jump through extra hoops to get something that we actually want. It's a real clarity there between your community vision and the policies that that direct how development actually occurs. One of the things that we've done, throughout the country, and there's variations of this in Silverton, is sort of tried to we put in place lot and building size minimums in a way that it makes it hard to build smaller housing types. And so again, you talked about the small lot concept earlier. That's one variation on looking at this. Dimensional standards. So dimensional standards are things like your setback requirements, your FAR, your height requirements, all of these things, making sure that they're still, basically realistic and make sense. Because sometimes these are, they're just not practical and they don't make a lot of sense, and it's very ambiguous, and or it's just kind of random. Even here I built an ADU in my mom's backyard in Glenwood, and at the time the setback requirements were really silly, and we showed them what the resulting accessory dwelling unit was going to look like in the yard, and they're like, well, that's really weird, why does it look that way? And we said, because we built it to your dimensional standards. And they're like, oh, well, that's a bummer. So enabling small lot development, making sure parking, and we're not over parking the site, and then thinking about the programs we can put in place that are actually going to incentivize or require affordability and housing diversity. And a couple places I'd point you to that have some cool policies in place that are also small towns are Pagosa Springs and Eagle. We have a whole sort of set of slides that just talk about Eagle. They're kind of cool in terms of a density bonus program and some other tools they've put in place to create more long-term affordable units and resident occupied units in their community. So I will just reiterate that in addition to the policy sort of regulatory side of it, there is a real need as we move forward, as you all move forward, to think about how do we create the resources needed to invest in affordability as well. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clark. We really appreciate your time and continued support as we implement this master plan, especially looking into what our housing can look like as we update our land use code. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Gabby from the Clarion team to talk about how we are beginning to address housing in our land use code. And I will share my screen 1 second.
Great. Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Clark. That was a wonderful introduction into how the land use code updates will be incorporating all of those housing policies and trying to get to affordability. And so if you go to the next slide, as Clark emphasized, it's essential that the regulations align with the policies, and the policies are established in the Compass Master Plan. The Compass Master Plan emphasizes the need to expand housing choices, opportunities, and affordability. And there's a quote from the plan that says housing affordability and choices plays an essential role in sustaining the social and economic fabric of Silverton. It is the foundation for maintaining a diversity of residents in our community that contribute to our authenticity. Next slide, please. In addition to that Compass Master Plan document, the town has a housing needs assessment. And in that assessment, there are several recommendations that directly relate to increasing housing within the land use regulations. First is to allow the development of attached homes. So those duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes that Clark had examples of by right. And what that means is they wouldn't require a public hearing in the single family district when those units provide long-term rental housing or at least one affordable unit for sale, as well as prioritizing moderate income local workforce units. And then a second recommendation was to create a temporary campground for workforce and but that could also include a site with tiny homes to alleviate more of those urgent housing needs. Next slide, please. So starting with a major portion of the land use code are the regulations that relate to zoning districts. And the town is separated into geographic areas, and in each of those geographic areas or zoning districts, there are different regulations and different requirements for construction and development in those districts. So the Compass Master Plan sets forth a future land use framework, which is shown here on the slide. And the two most relevant future land use categories are the housing infill categories, which are the yellow and orange areas on the map, as well as the neighborhood mixed use category, which is the bluish purple color. Both of those include up to duplex, and then in that neighborhood mixed use, it's planned to be more of that additional missing middle type housing. So things like the duplex, triplex, and multifamily. Next slide, please. So the land use code takes that land use framework and create zoning districts that can implement that framework. And so what that means, some potential proposed changes to create more housing, and Clark touched on a few of these things, are removing minimum floor area requirements other than those that are required by the building code, decreasing the minimum lot area requirements. Right now, the minimum lot area is 5,000, so that could be adjusted to maybe 2,500 to allow for those smaller lots to develop. And then considering adding a maximum building footprint to prevent excessively large single family homes, to make sure that land is most efficiently used, to maybe instead of a large single family home, to actually put in a duplex or a fourplex. And then also considering adding those types of incentives that maybe allow for additional height in exchange for those income restricted, affordable, or workforce housing. Next slide, please. Moving into the use regulations. So hand in hand with the zoning districts are the use regulations, and those tell you what type of, in this case, residential building you can have based on the zoning district you are in. So a big way to increase housing stock, but in a compatible manner, is to allow for up to duplexes, where currently only single family detached houses are allowed. And also introducing some of those new housing types. So Clark mentioned the cottage court, but there could also be a movable tiny home park, which is essentially like one of those cottage courts, but with tiny homes. But really just trying to explore adding as many opportunities for housing as possible while remaining in line with the scale and the character of Silverton. Next slide, please. Some additional regulations in the use chapter allowing manufactured homes and tiny homes where single family detached units are currently allowed. So outside of a manufactured home park setting, allowing someone to bring in a manufactured home on a single family lot. And then as well, removing unnecessary restrictions on actual manufactured home parks. So things like requiring additional screening that a single family detached home wouldn't need, or that a multifamily wouldn't need, not placing those overburdensome requirements on manufactured home parks. And then updating the accessory dwelling unit regulations to add some flexibility. So right now, the Silverton code requires that the long-term rental be for a local employee. So maybe exploring opening that up a bit will be part of updating the land use code. Next slide, please. Other considerations, incorporating some basic design standards that balance the cost and quality of development, especially in Silverton, things like the climate with snow storage, how the building is oriented, solar access, potentially adding some of those, but also trying to make sure that development is still affordable. Adding to what Clark said, reducing parking requirements especially for small scale infill projects. And then also the potential to fast track development review, meaning process those applications faster, or maybe those are administrative approvals rather than requiring a lengthy public hearing for a project that is providing affordable housing or workforce housing. Next slide, please. And then just a general update on our land use code rewrite. You can go to the next one, please. So for those that may be listening that are not aware of the project, the goals of updating the land use code are first and foremost to align with the Compass Master Plan. Also to update the code to make more predictable development outcomes, to simplify and clarify development standards for both people building within Silverton, staff, and developers. To create a land use code that is user-friendly, as well as maintain a clear and consistent structure. Next slide, please. So in addition to tonight, I focused on the zoning districts and use standards, but a land use code involves a very wide range of topics. And so all of those are captured on the screen. So in addition to those zoning districts and uses, there are development standards. There are standards related to the protection of environmentally sensitive lands. So things like the avalanche or slope hazard areas. There are requirements related to outdoor lighting, to signage within the town. And then the land use code also sets out all of those procedures that development has to go through. So when we're thinking in the context of housing, of making it easier, that will also be a big component, is making sure that whatever process that is required to be followed for certain different types of residential units, that it's clear and that applicants know the steps they'll need to take. Next slide, please. So this is our timeline. We are in April. This is the last of our learning sessions. And then those little arrows indicate that we've shifted a few things. So the full draft of the land use code will be available in June. There are interim drafts available on the project website. We have been working through those drafts with our stakeholder group. And those will be further refined based on their feedback and based on feedback we've gotten from the public for those full drafts. And then we're looking to head into adoption in the fall. Next slide, please. So something to keep on your radars at the end of the month, May 22nd and 23rd. We're still formalizing the actual times and locations of events, but we will be around town talking about the land use code update, trying to get all of your community public input before that full draft is published in June. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. For any details, we have a project website where everything lives. So any of the documents that we've published, presentations from other learning sessions, all of that is on the project website, which you can access via the town's main website, and it's that LUDC rewrite link. That's it for me.
Great. Thanks so much, Gabby, Ann, and Clark. That was our last learning session. So we hope that you enjoyed the series. You can go back and watch all of these. Like Gabby said, they're on the project website, which is silvertonluc.org. And we look forward to this summer and all of the community engagement and participation. If you have any questions or comments about this session or any of the previous sessions, feel free to reach out to town staff. Yeah, thank you guys.